transported to the front line. The commander of the Akhmet Special Forces, General Abdi Aladinov, hero of Russia, is in direct contact. Abdi Aronovich, hello. How would you explain what is happening in two encirclements? There are two encirclements at once. These are Kupiansk in the Kharkiv region and Pokrovsk in the DPR. For what reason does Zelensky not give the command to withdraw his army? I mean, he has practically no people left.
Olga, good evening. Well, actually, Olga, it's probably like deja vu for us. We've been through this deja vu many times over the past 4 years. It should be noted that people who are supposedly some kind of analysts, specialists, even the same overdue president, they say that 100,000 soldiers are there. That Russian soldiers are marching shoulder to shoulder in 10 rows to the same Pokrovsk and Kupiansk. They probably see it with those eyes, because the amount of drugs they use shows it all to them in such a meaningful way. At the same time, I must say that the military units of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation are really doing their job very competently. These divisions are squeezing both Pokrovsk and Kupiansk from all sides. And indeed, probably, if the expired president of Ukraine, who was once legal, had decided to withdraw the remnants of his troops, then maybe he would have saved someone. But in this case, what is his situation? He tried to prove to Trump, his master, that he can still do something. And in the end, the result is the same as before. And for him, this loss of his image may become final today. I am more than sure that after this loss, not only Trump, but also his European masters will turn away from him. Therefore, he will go to the end and kill every last one of his soldiers, just to stay afloat for another day.
There has been a flurry of media reports about a likely Ukrainian retreat from the beleaguered city of Pokrovsk. The Russian assaults have been resisted for some 15 months. The headlines tell the story. New York Times, Ukraine's dilemma as a city teeters, save lives or keep on fighting. For The Economist, Ukraine's valiant defense of Pokrovsk is nearing its end. The Washington Post, as Pokrovsk is set to fall, Ukraine must choose to fight or save troops. According to a Ukrainian journalist speaking to the BBC, some 1,000 troops risk being surrounded. But according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, the number is at least 5 or 6 times more. The advice conveyed by these stories, including from Ukrainian commentators, is that after a gallant fight, it is time to get out and move on. Yet neither President Zelensky nor Commander-in-Chief Alexander Siversk has suggested that such a fateful decision is imminent. On the 12th of November, Siversk insisted that, and I quote, "there is no talk of Russian control over the city of Pokrovsk or operational encirclement of the Defense Forces grouping." The next day, in an interview with Bloomberg, President Zelensky acknowledged a very difficult situation and said that any troop withdrawals would be a matter for the military commanders on the ground. He presented a dilemma rather than an obvious course of action. Nobody is pushing them to die for the sake of ruins, and the defense of the city could end up just too costly for us. The most important for us is our soldiers, close quotations. But then he added that the people would find it difficult to accept giving up on eastern territories and warned that nobody will guarantee you that if they seize this town or that town, they won't move further. There is no deterrent factor, close quotations. This is not the first time this dilemma has been faced and is unlikely to be the last for Ukraine. On the 10th of November, a decisive change took place on the Donbass front when the Russian Ministry of Defense announced that its troops control 99% of the city of Pokrovsk, while the Ukrainian army on the front line was retreating on a large scale. Several strongholds have been captured by Russian infantry and artillery, and the battle for control of the city is nearing its end. Based on public footage and battlefield reports, the key to Pokrovsk that Ukraine has been trying to hold is almost gone, and the Eastern Front has suffered its most serious collapse since the fall of Bakhmut in 2023. Although the armed forces of Ukraine has not officially acknowledged losses, several nearby positions have been abandoned. There are reports of Russian army breakthroughs from the northern front of Munograd, outposts around the village of Rivne, and the T-0504 route running from the Pokrovsk metropolitan area to Munograd have been completely taken over by the Russians. Ukrainian military observer Konstantin Mashovitz then said that the Ukrainian Frontline command is, and I quote, losing its combat capability in the entire urban area of the city of Pokrovsk and is unable to organize effective counter-offensive operations. Even more alarming was the video released by Russia showing the surrender of all Ukrainian defense units in Pokrovsk. Showing that the fighting spirit of Ukrainian soldiers in Pokrovsk has completely collapsed and the situation on the front is, and I quote, irreversible. Faced with this rapidly deteriorating situation, the Commander-in-Chief, General Alexander Siversk, personally went to the Pokrovsk front to try to stabilize the situation. However, feedback showed that this firefighting counter-offensive campaign did not bring any significant changes. The expert Mashovitz, citing AFU soldiers on the front line, said the Russians advanced very quickly and that General Siversk's reserves were suppressed by Russian long-range artillery fire right at the assembly point, making effective deployment impossible. General Siversk was initially seen as one of President Zelensky's few trusted hardliners after the summer 2023 counteroffensive. However, his repeated personal visits to the front line exposed a core problem: the chain of command's over-reliance on individual emergency deployments, as an article put it from Vietnam media. When local units lacked coordination with mobile reserve units reinforced by the AFU General Staff, and even the presence of the AFU's top commander could not help narrow the tactical gap at the front line, but also aggravated the chaotic situation. According to some Western military analysts, General Siversk's frontline trip this time is like a symbolic return visit and had no significant effect in turning around the situation on the Pokrovsk front in particular, and on the entire Ukrainian battlefield in general. Russia then seized the opportunity to amplify its propaganda campaign. Not only did the Russian Defense Ministry release footage of Ukrainian soldiers surrendering in Pokrovsk, it also claimed that some of the captured servicemen were foreign fighters, including mercenaries from Poland, Britain, and Canada. Although these statements have not been confirmed by any third party, their intention is clear: to portray the Russian attack on the city of Pokrovsk as a systemic counterattack against Western intervention, using the rhetoric of NATO's failure in the secret war. The Russian offensive represents a completely different approach than in the Bakhmut campaign. In 2023, the Russian army launched a massive attack on Bakhmut with overwhelming numbers and heavy artillery fire, eventually capturing the city, but at a very high cost. But in this siege of Pokrovsk, the Russian army is applying a more systematic urban strangulation tactic by encircling from multiple directions, cutting off supplies, patrolling tactically valuable heights, and simultaneously launching psychological warfare. First was the deployment of troops. Instead of deploying across the entire front, the Russian army concentrated its elite forces on the northern and southeastern fronts, using strangulation tactics to cut off AFU supplies. Then they used Wagner legacy tactics, surrounding cities with heavy firepower without attacking, to force the defenders to collapse on themselves. The second is the control of areas within the city. The city of Pokrovsk lies on a slope from north to south. The northwest of the city originally housed an important AFU artillery observation post. The Russian army prioritized the capture of high-rise buildings in this area, eliminating the AFU artillery positions in one blow, and then launching a counterattack. The most crucial element was psychological warfare. Moscow deliberately published images of Ukrainian defense forces surrendering, spreading them in real time on social media platforms in order to weaken the AFU's morale. The combination of information warfare and ground attacks led to the AFU forming a self-destruction chain in a short period of time. As a result, this atypical urban warfare model, which helped the Russian army avoid getting bogged down in high-intensity street fighting, instead taking control of the city at low cost, demonstrated the Russian army's tactical maturity after the Bakhmut campaign. Independent media such as Medusa reported that the fight for Pokrovsk and its outskirts had already consumed significant Ukrainian resources and pulled in a large number of reserves. As a result, defenses elsewhere have weakened. Russian troops have rapidly approached the northern edge of the fortified city of Guliapol in eastern Zaporizhzhia, attacking Konstantinivka and Siversk, and trying to push towards the Siversky Donets River near Lyman. While Ukrainian forces were still attempting to mount a resistance in Leningrad, they were rapidly retreating south and west of Novopavlivka under the pressure of Russia's larger Vostok contingent. The Ukrainian armed forces tried to stop the Russian advance along the natural defensive line of the Yancho River, but in early November, Russian units crossed the river in several places and continued pushing towards Guliapol, a key Ukrainian stronghold anchoring the defense of the eastern part of the Zaporizhzhia region. Russian troops have already cut off the armed forces of Ukraine's northern supply route, the Guliapol-Pokrovsk road near Danilivka. Forward Russian units have also captured the village of Zaporizhzhia, about 4 kilometers or 2.5 miles east of Guliapol. If Russian forces manage to cross the next water obstacle, which is the Haichu River, Guliapol could face encirclement. Russian units are also threatening to seize the settlement of Pokrovsk, which could open the way for an advance on the city of Zaporizhzhia from the east, deep into the Dnipropetrovsk region. To slow Russia's unusually fast advance, compared to the standards of this war, Ukraine's military command will almost certainly need additional reserves. But the armed forces of Ukraine has few free units at the moment. Most available forces, including some redeployed from the Guliapol area, have been tied up in counterattacks near Pokrovsk since August. Meanwhile, Russian forces are pushing forward along both banks of the Siversky Donets River in the direction of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. On the northern bank, Russian troops have become stuck along the line stretching along Novoselivka, Zaporizhzhia, the eastern outskirts of Lyman, the edges of Torske and Yampil. In the Torske-Yampil area, Ukrainian counterattacks have managed to stall the Russian advance. The situation, however, is more difficult for Ukraine on the western flank, between Novosilka and Lyman. The Russian units continue trying to slip through river crossings and into central Lyman. Defending the bridgehead on the northern bank, the Siversky Donets is essential for the armed forces of Ukraine in order to prevent Russian forces from crossing the river. If Russian troops were to secure positions along the river, they could put Sloviansk within range of FPV drone strikes and artillery fire. The distance from the river to the city center is less than 15 kilometers, or about 9 miles. On the southern bank of the Siversky Donets, Russian troops have captured Jonivka, a village on the heights north of Siversk. Siversk itself sits in a low-lying area, and Russian forces have already reached its outskirts from the south. If Russia were to seize Siversk, especially the high ground to its west, it could open a path for an advance on Sloviansk from the east. For the AFU, the threat would become even more serious if that offensive were coordinated with Russian forces operating on the northern bank of the Siversky Donets. The fall season of 2025 has made one reality clear: Ukraine is exhausted. Not because its army fights poorly, it fights fiercely, but because Russia has more men, more shells, and more strategic patience, and the West no longer has the political will to finance an endless conflict. Europe cuts aid and prepares for peace. Trump negotiates spheres of influence with Moscow. Kiev staggers between corruption scandals and attempts to appear engaged in negotiations happening without it. Russia grinds down Ukraine's army and captures key population centers, positioning itself to dictate terms. The coming months will show how willing Moscow is to compromise and how prepared Kiev is to capitulate. But the trend is unmistakable. This conflict ends not with Ukraine's victory, but with a deal between the US and Russia, in which Ukraine becomes the object, not the subject, of negotiations.
We listen to their radio broadcasts in many places, and there is a lot of crying. There is a simple question. How serious are the defensive detachments behind them? All their national battalions are actually sitting behind the backs of those fighters whom they catch on the street and throw them to the front. And, of course, they are between life and death. The state of the Ukrainian troops is really deplorable. Of course, someone there has hope that now, for example, the French will come to their aid, or someone else will come to their aid. But most of the fighters of the Ukrainian formations have already realized